and welcome to the Bloodstream Podcast, a show serving the greater bleeding disorders community, brought to you by Believe Limited and Bloodstream Media, and made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. It is just me today. I am Amy Board. I am your healthcare advocate, your nonprofit nerd, and I'm reminding you to please speak with a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. On today's show, we have a stacked show. Patrick is in a fantastic interview with Thomas Bartlett about life with an invisible disorder. It's going to be fantastic. Stick around. You don't want to miss it. And we have the next installment of the gene therapy segment, and it's a total ringer, and you won't want to miss that one either. We have got all that and more on this episode. Welcome to Bloodstream. Listeners, thank you for joining me today. And if you like what you hear, please share this episode on social media or subscribe to the Bloodstream Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, which would be awesome. Awesome. I also want to remind you, dear listeners, that the Bloodstream Podcast is made possible by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Takeda's got this website, bleedingdisorders.com, where you can learn all about Takeda's resources for and commitment to the bleeding disorder community. Takeda believes in a world free of bleeds and are dedicated more than ever in their efforts to offer a wide range of programs and support to help patients throughout their treatment journey, wherever on that journey they may be. You can learn more by simply visiting bleedingdisorders.com. And for their founding and ongoing support of the Bloodstream Podcast, I would just like to say thank you to Takeda. And a big thank you to our segment sponsor, CSL Behring, for supporting our gene therapy segment. All right, y'all, we have great stuff today. It is just me, so I'm not going to bore you with a monologue. I'm sure you're like, Amy, how are you? I'm fine. I'm doing great. I got married. I think that's my biggest news. I got married and it was wonderful. And if you go to my Instagram, you can look at my pictures if you want to on the highlights and all the things. But I just know from meeting so many of you at the events that we do at Bleeding Disorders events across the country that you guys are big supporters of Patrick and myself. So I know you would want to hear that. And it was a wonderful day. And so anyway, would love to hear from you. And thanks for all of that good stuff. So our first interview today is fantastic. You'll actually get to hear Patrick's voice. Patrick had a fantastic conversation with Thomas Bartlett. Thomas has Myasthenia Gravis, and it is MG Awareness Month, actually, which is fantastic. But what the conversation evolved into, which I just think is so fantastic, is Thomas and Patrick really have a wonderful conversation about what is life like living with an invisible disorder, a rare disease or chronic illness where people don't know, and what that is like, the very, I think, unique isolation that causes. It's a fantastic conversation, so let's get to it.
All right, Bloodstream listeners, I'm joined now by Tom Bartlett. He is a person living with myasthenia gravis. I knew I was probably going to mess that up, Tom, but I had to go for it anyway.
You're not the first one.
I'm sure I'm not. Right. And we'll talk a little about how we connected and met. But I want to highlight this is MG Awareness Month. So for the listeners here who will be largely unaware of MG, what is it and what's your experience with it been like? Then we'll talk a little bit about what the Awareness Month is all about.
Okay, so myasthenia gravis is a neuromuscular disease. It was actually identified back in the late 1600s. And then it was 2017 when the first FDA-approved therapy came out.
A little bit of a timeline there.
A little bit. And so in the rare disease space, this is not unusual.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that we learn about living with a rare disease. So myasthenia gravis affects the way our muscles function. So simply put, our brains will send a signal down to what's called a neuromuscular junction to send a chemical over to receptors on our muscles. Okay, great. We don't even know this is happening. All the conversations we're having, our mouths moving, all of that, it's all happening. So at the muscle, there are receptors that receive this chemical. And I call them baseball mitts.
Okay.
And there are thousands and thousands of baseball mitts out there trying to catch the chemical to do what the brain says. Except those with myasthenia gravis, our antibodies are killing those receptors. And that is the terminology that's typically used. Our body is killing the receptors on our muscles to receive a signal to do something.
Got it. Okay. So then how did you come to be diagnosed? Were you having an uptick in issues, or how did that happen?
Yeah, and what you find is, it's a great question, because what you find, most people don't know they are sick with myasthenia gravis or MG, and they just continue to live their life not feeling great, weak, fatigued. Things just don't function properly. Before where I am now, I was an athlete for most of my life. All the way up until when I got diagnosed in my late 50s. I was still playing in high-level tennis tournaments. I actually still played baseball, like real baseball, hardball.
In your 50s?
Yeah.
Oh, we need a whole nother podcast session to talk about that. Okay.
Played in tournaments in Arizona, played in tournaments out in Vegas, and it was a ball.
Wow.
And if you think about it, and I was a golfer too. So I was a 6 handicap golfer. So things like you would think about timing is incredibly important, the nuances of the functioning of a muscle.
Right.
So what I found is I was playing in a tennis tournament, and things just weren't working quite right. And to the extent I was playing in the third match of the day, it's 95 degrees out, and I used to do it all the time, but I could not physically move. Ball would come over the net, didn't move, did not move. We lost. I was playing in a doubles tournament. I lost. And I was like, okay, dehydrated, whatever.
Sure.
Went on a business trip the following Monday, and wake up on a Tuesday morning, look in the mirror, my right eye is pointing straight up.
Whoa.
And my right eyelid is covering half my eye. But, I did this my whole life. And I'm like, okay, that's odd. But I have an appointment at 9 o'clock, and I was in New York City. Trying to get around New York City, you get a planned time, and I'm just, my brain is working and functioning this way. My eye is off, but okay, we'll call the doctors and my PCP. They're like, can you come in right away? I'm like, no, I got things to do. So they're like, come in as soon as you can. So the following Thursday, I went in. And they're looking at me and they're going, no, Tom, your eye is not where it's supposed to be. And 5 minutes later, she called in the head of the practice. And so this is my initiation into the world of myasthenia gravis. They know something's wrong. They actually did an MRI to exclude things. But they came back after a blood test and said, Tom, you have myasthenia gravis. And
what the heck is that, right?
Exactly. And like you, struggled to pronounce it.
Right.
Got to go learn about it. And then following the diagnosis, it wasn't like, oh, you're diagnosed, you're sick, you must have these symptoms. I saw a neurologist, one of the best in the world for MG, based here in Boston. And she told me it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that's exactly what it started to happening. So my body was really reacting. The more you move, more you try to use your muscles, the more your body is killing the receptors on the muscles.
Okay.
So folks will say, well, why don't you exercise? It's counterproductive. Can't exercise. Well, you can try, but you have to be very cognizant of what you're doing.
So what are you doing to manage and live your best life with MG?
Smile a lot. Education is keen for me. I had to resign from my position after being diagnosed for 2 years, and it was because I was declining.
What were you doing?
I worked as the head of global science for a life science consulting firm.
Okay.
And what we did is to compress time.
How so?
So we worked with technology to reduce time to outcomes so that a new therapy could be brought to market sooner.
And you had to resign from that post?
Yep. Because I could no longer function as the head of global sales, I reported directly to the CEO as a neurologist. And when I told him, I said, Ari, I have myasthenia. And he goes, geez, Tom, I'm really sorry.
So wait,
that crushed me.
He's a neurologist, and it just is...
Neuroscientist.
He's a neuroscientist, and that is coincidental to your having MG.
Yep.
Wow, you just happen to be working in this world and working for this person.
Yep.
Wow, how
Yep.
unusual.
And I worked in science, and that our job and my job was to communicate with chief medical officers, chief technology officers, CEOs, to say you should bring our company in to help you reduce time using technology, meaning like computational technology, et cetera, AI. And you can take that drug you're looking to bring to market and reduce that time maybe down by 2 years, 3 years. And that's what we did really, really well. But I couldn't do that anymore. Fatigue just crushed me. I would lay down for 3 hours in the afternoon, just lay down like a boat anchor. Couldn't move. So that was my initiation into this world.
You know, there's so much about living with hemophilia that from the little I understand about MG, feels relatable in the framework of living with an invisible disease, right? People to look at you, and if they know your history or you got baseball trophies in your office or whatever, little would they know that.
Behind me.
I was saying that just as a happenstance, but he actually literally does.
That home plate was my induction into the Hall of Fame of the league that I played in for 20 years.
Wow. Okay, 20-year Hall of Famer. How would someone know that you're just sitting like an anchor, feeling fatigued? And I'm a tall guy who moves with a purpose. How would anyone know the extraordinary amounts of pain going on in my ankles as I move around?
Yep.
How have you in the last few years kind of coped with that on a personal level, and to whatever degree you needed to, communicated with people effectively to let them know, look, I'm not being lazy. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I'm backing out. I need to take a break. How do you communicate about that with people, and how have you coped with this transition personally?
Well, we need like 2 hours.
Yeah, in the next 3 minutes,
right.
Tom, answer this giant question.
Right. But it's the pinnacle of all questions, right? How do you cope? And anybody who's diagnosed with a rare disease, incurable, treatable, yes, but it doesn't mean that you're going to feel great. It means that you're not going to decline where you may not be here anymore. And so, how do you cope? There are a lot of dark days. But for me, coping was, how do I help? How do I involve myself into this community? I have a unique background that, from a technology standpoint, I worked at Apple for 18 years. I worked for Dell, and technology was my thing. Then I applied it to science, working at the consulting firm. That was my thing. So how do I apply that to help within the community itself? So I've joined organizations. I do not so much public speaking, but things like this. I write for the Rare Disease Advisor, what it's like to live with the disease of MG. I don't sugarcoat things, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. I want to have a smile, but this is not good.
Yeah.
I might be here, but it's not good. So coping for me is to doing what I can to help other people along the way, answer questions for them, and mostly it's about, have you had this experience? And because it is rare, they can't go to anybody else. There's maybe 50 or 60,000 people in the United States that are diagnosed with MG. Sounds like a lot in some cases, where there's only 200 cases globally. I've spoken to folks like that.
Yeah, sure.
But it's still, like you, never heard of it.
You won't be bumping into somebody with it happenstancely. It's rare enough that, even at a population size of 50,000, you have to be very intentional and seek out other people, seek out the specialists. To your point, it's so interesting to learn about your background. I didn't know this coming into the conversation, and we certainly could talk for hours. I have no doubt, and hope to. I hope there's some things we'll be working on together down the road. But as a final thought for now, in the spirit of MG Awareness Month, what is top of mind for you? What do you want to educate people about? What message are you pushing out there during MG Awareness Month this year?
For MG Awareness, it's about understanding the people who are living with it, and then translating that into research. So how do we bring this to a community that is unaware, that will be passionate enough to want to contribute, in whether it's monetarily or within their specialty, to do research on MG. We're lucky. We're one of the 5% that has a therapy that's FDA approved. Most rare disease don't have that. So we're lucky. So let's take that efforts and continue to drive the industry and take what we've learned. And education is it's critical. So the awareness is to educate folks out there and let them know there are folks like me. And even though we look great, life can be pretty daunting at times. And could be in the same day. Who knows how I'm going to feel at 5 o'clock today. So let's go out and learn about it and be compassionate for those who have it.
June is Myasthenia Gravis, or MG, Awareness Month. Let's use it to spread education and compassion. I like that, Tom. I like you. I'm glad I know you, and thanks for coming on Bloodstream today. Well,
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
See, y'all, I told you it was going to be a fantastic conversation, and it was. And it absolutely was. Next up is gene therapy. I hope y'all have been vibing with these gene therapy segments. I personally have. I think the story of gene therapy is really compelling to me. And so we have hopefully offered just a little bit of the human side of things. I think we really concentrate on the science of gene therapy quite often. And while that's important, this segment has been about some of the human reactions to the struggles and all of that. So I've really hoped that you guys have enjoyed it. We would love to hear feedback on this segment. And this next segment is going to be great. It's brought to you by CSL Behring, a global biotherapeutics leader focused on serving the rare disease community by providing innovative therapies. They now have a first-of-its-kind treatment for hemophilia B. To learn more about this treatment option, visit beyondhemb.com and download the B Support app from the App Store or Google Play to stay up to date on relevant information and to manage your treatment journey. And now, on to the next installment of the gene therapy segment.
I will say are both young men, actually, that we dosed here at the Hemophilia Outreach Center, were not very compliant with their prophylaxis, and they're very willing to admit that.
Our guest today is Andrea Buxton. She is a family nurse practitioner at the Hemophilia Outreach Center in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Andrea led the clinical team of the first dose of gene therapy for a hemophilia B patient. So let's listen in to Andrea's retelling of the shared decision-making process from the all-important nurse's point of view and the reason why her two patients dosed made good candidates for gene therapy. A special thank you to Melody Joy Payne for conducting the interview.
I think as providers, it's our job to make sure we're educating on all new treatments, right? Not just gene therapy. But I think some patients are going to say, it's not the time for them, and that's okay. They might want to wait a while, or maybe they're content with their quality of life in regards to their prophylaxis schedule, their, maybe lack of bleeds currently, and those patients aren't going to make that choice, I think, to travel down the path. I think you're always going to have patients that are a better fit, and it's going to really come down to what are the patient's goals and value. A lot of the patients pursuing maybe the gene therapy have that same, maybe fear of needles, or they just, they're younger, and we know that younger people generally are not the most compliant with medications. And I think, or have always thought that ironically, it's, males that suffer from a bleeding disorder the most, right? We've got definitely a larger population of severe to moderate hemophilia males than we do females, but males generally are a little less compliant. In younger age, we have studies that show that just their health in general, they kind of feel like maybe they're almost invincible to having a significant bleed. And then unfortunately, they don't do their prophylaxis and they have a bleed, and they're reminded that, that's right, I have hemophilia. and now I have to treat, or I'm going to have further problems. So there's been discussions, I know, amongst other healthcare providers in regards to if they're not compliant now, are they going to be compliant with that follow-up? You know, maybe we don't want to take that risk, but I think those are actually the patients that you will see benefit the most from gene therapy.
Melody then asked, what makes a good candidate for gene therapy?
There is a lot that we do before to make sure that they are a candidate for gene therapy. We, make sure that we check their liver health with both blood tests and looking at an ultrasound, and making sure they don't have significant fibrosis on their liver. We check to see if they have antibodies to the gene therapy. For hemophilia B, even if they do have some antibodies, it does not exclude them from receiving the treatment. We do know that there were patients, about 30%, that did have antibodies, but only one patient had a very high titer, and that was a patient that didn't respond. So we, make sure that there's no no active infections to Hep C, HIV, things that could cause the gene therapy not to work. You want to make sure you've got a good, healthy liver, because that's where the gene therapy transgene is going to, there's a promoter or like a honing beacon on the gene therapy capsid itself that targets the liver. So we need healthy liver cells. Once that's all done and, everything looks good, the patient, we do proceed with the insurance process, which can be a very drawn out process. So that does take a little time, but once that's completed and the patient is set up for a day of infusion, we have several visits in regards to education and making sure they understand the process. They have to actually teach it back to us for us to determine if they're fully comprehending what's going to be happening. And then they come into our center for the day of infusion. It's about a 1-hour infusion for hemophilia B, and then they're monitored for 3 hours afterwards just to make sure there's no delayed infusion reactions that could occur. And then they have to come back weekly for lab monitoring for 12 weeks. So it's the process itself leading up and then afterwards for that 3 months is drawn out. But once they get kind of past that 12 weeks, we only have them come back once a month for 3 months, and then they're coming for their labs every 3 months, and once they hit a year, it's every 6 months. So it does gradually get less and less visits in between, especially once they hit that year mark. But we want to make sure their liver, there are patients that will develop elevation of their liver enzymes, and really it's an immune response to this foreign substance going into your liver. So we want to make sure we watch that closely, because that could impact their factor IX from not going up like we would want it to. And then they're put on a dose of steroids. Our 2 patients, and Mason included, did have to go on steroids for a little while afterwards. But he was okay with that, just knowing that this would help keep his liver healthy and decrease that inflammation that was happening, and allow his factor IX to continue to go up. So that wasn't an issue for him at all. And now he just comes to us every couple months.
Melody then asked a great question. What differentiates gene therapy as a treatment opposed to a cure?
Yeah, so there are, different types of gene therapies that have been tried, and not only for hemophilia, but also some different diagnoses. So there is, yes, gene editing, or like the CRISPR technology. There's the gene cloning. And for some of those things, depending on how the gene therapy is done, yes, we can say that, it's a cure, because we are fixing your actual genetic mutation. And now you have this completely normal DNA. You don't have any mutation left in it. Whereas this, we're just transferring this functional strand of your factor IX to produce copies. So we can't say that we're curing your hemophilia because we're not. You still have hemophilia. In fact, Mason and other patients that receive this, if they have children, a daughter someday, they will still pass that mutation down to their daughter. And so it could still continue in the family for generations to come. So we're not curing their actual mutation, but we are delivering a copy that can produce its own factor IX, making it, what we call maybe a functional cure in regards to you have hemophilia, but you don't have to treat your hemophilia like you did in the past because your factor IX now is working or has a level high enough that you don't need to do your prophylaxis or have bleeds.
Thank you to Andrea for her candor, and thank you to Melody for her fabulous interviewing skills. There has been so much said about gene therapy from a clinical perspective, but now, since FDA approval for both hemophilia A and B gene therapies, we get to hear more of the humanity of the decision-making process. And we hope you are enjoying this segment, and a continued thank you to CSL Behring for supporting. Let's turn it over to Andrea for the final word.
We find that with a lot of patients with hemophilia or other bleeding disorders, they might have dreams and things that they've always wanted to do, but they can't because they have this bleeding disorder. So I think this, once we kind of see further down the road, like how long is this therapy lasting, those are avenues that could potentially open up for those patients.
Once again, this segment has been brought to you by CSL Behring, which now has a first-of-its-kind hemophilia B treatment. Visit beyondhemb.com or download B Support wherever you get your apps for more information. All right, y'all, that is the end of our episode. We made it. You made it with me. I want to thank everybody who contributed to this episode. Thomas, of course, and of course to Patrick for leading that fantastic interview. And of course to Andrea, who is our family nurse practitioner at the Hemophilia Outreach Center. Fantastic stuff on that gene therapy segment. And of course, all of this would not be possible without our presenting sponsor, Takeda. Visit bleedingdisorders.com to learn more. And as well, thank you to CSL Behring for their support of the gene therapy segment. Y'all, Bloodstream is going to be back on June 28th. Patrick will be back as well, so it's going to be great to connect with him. We'll have a brand new I'm Fine segment, which is headed up and written by Luke Pembroke, the infamous Luke Pembroke. So it's going to be all, you won't want to miss it. And with that, that's all for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast wherever you listen to have that next episode delivered right to you the moment it goes live. And as always, you can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com for all of the things. Find us on social as well. You know what I'm saying? I am your host, Amy Board. Until next time, take self-care of yourself, everybody. Bye-bye.